Hello everyone! Today we are creating an amazing diorama for my 1/72 scale SDKFZ model. This project promises to be exciting, and I can't wait to share each step with you. First, I take a large piece of thick foam. This will be the base of our theme. I carefully mark out a road on it, making sure to do this at an angle to give the diorama a dynamic and interesting look. This approach helps create a sense of movement and diversify in the composition, make it much more visually appealing. Next, I begin making cuts to create a canal that will be used for draining excess water. This element not only adds realism, but also plays an important part in the story. My engineers will be mining this canal. I create cuts for the canal on both sides to bring variety to the scene on the sides. The absence of elevation and hills is compensated by interesting details that makes the diorama unique. To give foam a more aesthetic look, I use double-sided tape to attach wooden panel along its edges. But I won't dwell on these technical moments for too long, as more interesting details await us ahead. The first such detail will be a wooden fence, and to simulate the wooden fence I use the same thin wooden panel as for decorating the edges of the diorama. This wood is perfect for creating miniature details due to its lightness and flexibility. Now I need to cut the plate into thin strips that will mimic the fence. This process requires care and precision to ensure each strips look realistic and matches to the scale of the diorama. Now these strips need to be glued to one longer wooden strip, which will serve as the base and support for the shape of the fence. After several minutes of meticulous work, I managed to create a quite realistic wooden fence. Now it needs to be weathered to look like old wood affected by time and weather. For this I take a modeling knife and carefully remove some details, and add some damage to the fence. As you can see, this is an ideal approach for working with wood. In addition to the main work, I also did some additional work on the fence off camera, and now it looks even cooler and more interesting. The next step is cutting several plastic tubes that I will place in the canal for water drainage. As you can see, it's all quite simple here. Now we can move on and start creating texture paste, which will give the diorama a finished look and the necessary texture. This time I decided to use my favorite mixture: plaster, PVA glue, a bit of water and acrylic paint. This paste is excellent for creating earthy surfaces. If you add acrylic paint to the mixture, it prevents the ugly white color from showing if the diorama gets accidentally damaged. Instead, beneath the damaged layer, you'll see a dark paint that won't spoil the overall appearance of the composition. Now the texture paste is mixed, and I use a white brush to apply it. This time I made the paste more liquid, so that it's easier to apply it with a brush. It's important to carefully coat all areas of our diorama with texture paste to conceal the foam and protect it from the effect of paint. Foam sometimes melts under the influence of acrylic and various adhesive, so this step is particularly important. Once all the areas are well covered, I can start applying additional texture paste to create relief on the diorama. From time to time I also used a hair dryer to particularly dry the diorama. This allowed me to give the surface a more varied and interesting texture, as well as speed up the drying process. So, after several hours of work, I achieved a relief that completely satisfied me. Now I can move on to working on the canal. For this I use sand of different sizes to simulate small stones. I pour the finest stone onto the bottom of the canal to create a base and add realism. Then, armed with tweezers, I use larger sand grains and pebbles to give interesting shapes to the canal walls. This approach makes the canal more lively and diverse, adding uniqueness to the diorama. By adding the tubes I cut earlier and securing them with superglue and various sized stones, I ensure that the tubes look natural in the canal. But I felt that one section of the fence wouldn't be enough to complete the picture. So I decided to make a second section of fence and make it fallen over to add variety and dynamic to the diorama. Additionally, my diorama needs a tall object to create compositional balance. I decided that a telegraph pole in one corner would be an excellent solution. To create it, I am using bamboo stick and leftover from the wooden fence. And here is the result I achieved. Now I need to add a few small details to the telegraph pole and place it on the diorama. And it turned out exactly as I wanted. However, I felt that here weren't enough details, so I decided to use fishing line to simulate broken wires. This small but important detail adds realism and make our diorama more lively and interesting. Here is how our diorama look after adding all the details. Now it's time to prime it in black. These steps help create a unified base layer, onto which the main color and texture will be applied. As you may have noticed, I decided not to overload the diorama with details, so that my SDKFZ looks good and can be easily examined from all sides. The only place where there are many details is the upper left corner of the diorama. Here you can find a tarpaulin, two sections of wooden fence and various construction debris. These elements create an interesting focal point, without distracting from the main model. Overall, compared to larger dioramas, this one has relatively few details. However, for such a small diorama, almost a vignette, this is quite sufficient. It allows for a balanced composition, where each detail has its place and significance without overwhelming the overall picture. Now that all the main work is done, I can confidently say that I am completely satisfied with the result. Overall, everything turned out just as I wanted. Now it's time to paint the diorama in the base color. I apply the first layer using a mix of three colors: flat earth, German pale brown and white. This base layer will give the ground a natural look and create a foundation for further steps. Next, I add some warm tones to this mix and apply it in large patches again. This painting technique will diversify the appearance of the diorama and add depth and realism to its texture. After that, I apply a oil-based wash. This layer helps emphasize the detail and create contrast for the subsequent layer. Now I can apply the final top layer of paint for our ground texture. This is the darkest layer and it needs to be applied carefully to not destroy the effect achieved earlier. I believe I managed this task well. Then I can proceed with applying light patches using the dry brushing technique. This will give a natural look to the ground texture. In the end, the ground texture looks simply wonderful, and now I can move on to painting the fine details. I decided to start with painting the stones in the canal. Some stones I highlighted more prominently. With the rest I dry brushed in a simple grey color. Of course, I could have used different colors, but I didn't want to turn the canal into a rainbow, so I opted for a straightforward grey shade. After painting the stones, I shifted my focus to painting the fence. Using US dark green and the dry brushing technique, I painted the fence. Due to the black primer, dry brushing perfectly accentuates the edge of the fence. Then I painted the construction debris and the second section of the fence using the same method. Next I moved on to painting the tarpaulin. I choose a dark red color, which adds an interesting contrast to overall palette of the diorama. After that, using a rust color, I painted the metal parts on the telegraph pole, and of course I painted broken wires in the same color. Now it's time to see how the grass I prepared in advance will look on this diorama. Aside from large clumps of grass, off-screen I made preparation from small 2mm grass, painted in a summer color. I apply the grass to the diorama using superglue, aiming to create natural variations. Having various clumps allows me to create really interesting compositions. But this time I didn't want to use too much grass. I decided that a few small clumps would enhance the scene just enough. I also considered using dry autumn grass that I made earlier, but it blended too much with the color of the ground on the diorama. Therefore, I used a green bush, which I placed near the telegraph pole. And here is what we get after all the grass had been placed on the diorama. All that's left is to add a few small bushes to the lower part of the diorama, and it will be complete. Additionally, I decided to use various posters printed on the printer, depicting propaganda material from that time. Nothing serious. In my version, they are simple posters without swastikas or other bayonet symbols. These few posters look great on the old fence and really complement and diversify the scene on the diorama. To make the posters look more authentic in this setting, I weathered them slightly using a dark wash. I did the same with the fence. Off screen, I added a printed German newspaper lying next to the canal in the mud. Now we can glue at our main heroes. And if you are interested in how I paint figures in 1/72 scale, I have a separate video on that topic. You can find it in the annotation or in the description of this video. Now that is everything in place, we can proceed to the demonstration, and I can convey to you the idea behind the diorama. The story revolves around two soldiers from an engineering unit, heading to a designated position. However, since enemy forces have already breached the defense, and there is nowhere for our engineers to go, they all decided to retreat. To delay pursuit, they opted to blow up the canal. Water will spill from the canal, washing out the road, and at the very least slowing down pursuit for some time. Overall, this is a small vignette that serves as the base for my SDKFZ model. I believe it's a great guide for those who want to showcase their model without spending a lot of time on creating a diorama. Everything here is simple and in its place, yet it looks completely natural. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give this video a thumb up, subscribe to my channel, and comment on what you like and didn't like in this work. Also, you can find all useful video on how to create the grass, paint figures, as well as how I assembled and painted the SDKFZ model in the description of this video. Good luck to everyone and see you soon. Bye bye.